There is a game that came out in recent months that I truly feel like a lot of the internet is just kind of sleeping on. A lot of people never really looked into it or picked it up. That game is Robocop Rogue City. I think this game was vastly underestimated before its release by a lot of game critics, by a lot of players, but there were also a lot of players really interested in the game. I believe something like 180,000 people added it to their Steam wishlist before it launched. We don't have concrete numbers, but we do know that the game publisher Nacon actually announced that this adaptation is its best ever video game launch, which I think is awesome. But there's still a lot of people who haven't really checked this game out, and that's why I wanted to talk about it a little more in a few videos, because this game has a surprisingly deep narrative. This narrative that the game produces and walks you through and has you experience is very much about what it means to be human, what it means to be a machine, and what it actually is to be a person. You know, do the parts make up the whole kind of thing. Almost the ship of Theseus idea. If you replace all of these different parts of a man, is the soul of the man still the same? The soul of the man underneath all of those parts. Looking at Robocop Rogue City, you know, from the trailers or maybe from just your knowledge in passing of the 80s movies, maybe you haven't seen them, a lot of people underestimate this franchise. They look at it and they think, oh, that's a fun series. It's about a guy who's a police officer who becomes a robot and he stops criminals. And that's kind of where their knowledge of it ends. And I know this because a lot of friends that I talked to before getting them into this franchise, that was their understanding of it from the outside on a surface level. But there's a lot more to Robocop the character than that in his films, in the humanity of the character, and there's a lot more in Robocop Rogue City. But before we hop into it, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I also do plan to do at least one more video on Robocop Rogue City, I believe before the end of the year. And I also would like to Let's Play this game at some point on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, where we played through a lot of games. The link to that is in the description down below, but Robocop Rogue City follows the events of Robocop 2. This takes place between the movies Robocop 2 and 3, and it's very much about police officer Alex Murphy, who is Robocop. I'm not going to spoil the ending or the major character reveals of this game, because my whole goal with talking about this is to celebrate the game's accomplishments while also maybe convincing just a handful more people to check it out, because I really do think it's a heartfelt project. So because of that, I don't want to do major story spoilers, but essentially, you are a cyborg. You are part man, part machine. Alex Murphy was murdered in the line of duty as a police officer in Detroit, and this is in sort of an alternate future. He was brought back to life by the company OCP. This is Omni Consumer Products. They are essentially a somewhat evil company. They're very misguided, but also there's a lot in this game that kind of points to the idea that some people within OCP also want what's best for this almost dystopian Detroit. The thing I like almost the most about this game is how it captures the feeling of the movies. Now, the feeling of the movies is this dystopian, alternate future Detroit where there's technology kind of run rampant, crime is all over the place, there's not really a big control on that, and the police have become a privatized entity. And now before people tune out and they say like, well, I don't like the police, this obviously is not for me, something I think is interesting about the Robocop franchise is it doesn't just paint all police as good, normal people, you know, who are just, you know, perfect, but also it doesn't paint them all as corrupt assholes. In this world, regardless of how you may feel about the real world, because that always comes up with this subject matter, I think it's interesting that the characters are very three-dimensional. There are a few police officers who are like 100% devoted to the cause, they're doing it just to help people, they're great, but there's also a lot of people who are very frustrated and are like, hey, I want my paycheck, we're gonna go on strike, because OCP has sort of bought out the police. What they did was they went into a massive contract with the city of Detroit to sort of run the police department and say, hey, we're gonna clean up the streets, we're gonna clean up crime. But as you're walking through the world, you're finding out there's a lot more to the dynamics of all these characters and their interactions than it appears to be on surface level. So for example, there is this idea of Delta City. This idea is essentially to tear down old Detroit, which is full of crime and just horrible things, and to replace it with Delta City, where people have living units and jobs, and it's safer and more secure and automated. And on the surface, there are arguments to be made that that's a good idea. But then you look beneath the surface, and you see a lot of the shortcuts that OCP is trying to take to make that a reality that are also hurting people. And it kind of becomes this gray area where you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, well, what would the benefits be to this decision? What would they not be? And Robocop is put in the position in this game where he actually has to think about these things. You as the player have to think about these things when you're interacting with people and giving them your opinions. But this isn't just a Telltale style game. This isn't just a game where you walk around, talk to people, and make decisions. You absolutely can do that, where you can solve little miniature stories and figure out what's going on and make some decisions. But also this game, it has a fantastic combat system. We've talked about that before. And something that I really like with the narrative of this game is that the combat system plays seamlessly into the narrative because of who you are. You are Robocop. You are a walking tank. You are this weapon. And so you fight like one. It makes complete sense. And a lot of people look at Robocop and they don't see a person because of that. They see this robot that is programmed to go around and help people and prevent crimes, and sometimes doesn't do what they want him to do. And I think this really plays into the human element of Robocop Rogue City, which is one of my favorite things in this game. Robocop Rogue City asks you a question of how you view yourself as Robocop. Would you view yourself as, well, I was dead, they brought me back, so now I'm just some machine that's here to help on borrowed time? Or would you view yourself as a person given a second chance to affect the world? Even after a lot of your decision making and missions that you go on, and even the free roam elements of the game in Detroit, you will come back to the police station and you will undergo psychiatric evaluations where you talk to a character who you can also influence over the course of the story, their narrative, and that character will kind of evaluate you, ask you questions about how the character views themselves, share things with you, and also ask you questions about how Robocop views himself. You know, is he a person? Is he not? And the decisions that you make throughout the game that tie into the narrative really go on to determine how people view Robocop. If you are an asshole to people, if you're just going around being a jerk to everyone, they're going to see you as this law enforcement machine, a soulless robot. But if you don't do that, if you decide to take the extra time, go the extra mile, interact with more people, do more things, and go out of your way to do what would be human, sometimes making exceptions when the law is broken, but for a good reason, instead of just being a dick about it. You know, there's a lot of things like that with the game that I think are done very, very well, and they play into the really deep narrative, the surprisingly deep narrative for a game that was on a budget. You know, this was not a massive title. This was a budget title. I think that these things tie very well into that story and into that world and really make you think about a lot of different things. Some of my favorite movies and stories are things that ask the question, what is a person? What does it mean to be human? And what qualifies you as that? Even if you find the meaning, what qualifies you as that? Is it just your flesh and blood? Is it the scientific definition of a human? Or is it your soul? Is it your heart? Is it your personhood? I love how Robocop is willing to get into those discussions and those ideas in the same way that the original movies did as well. They got into the idea of who was Alex Murphy, who is Robocop, are they the same person or not? And they put you very much in the shoes of that struggle while trying to progress the narrative and also find your humanity or lack thereof. Something I love about the narrative of this game as well is that they find really interesting organic ways to make you ask these questions about your humanity, not just through decision making, but also through the game's concrete narrative. In the movies, especially in the first two, Robocop is really dealing with who or what he is. He's dealing with these same questions, and part of how that manifests is sort of in almost PTSD-like flashbacks, or I should say manifestations of either his past good memories or his past bad memories, and those things affect him differently than normal people because of the technological and mechanical aspects of him that are not just human flesh. He also is combined with a lot of robotics. So sometimes things will affect him differently when it comes to memories. In this game, there is an entire plot about Robocop grappling with these questions, where essentially he is seeing hallucinations at times of things that are not even there, and sometimes of memories that went completely differently, almost like nightmares. He's seeing a lot of his insecurities, a lot of his fears. He's seeing friends turn on him, or he's being haunted by their voices while walking through a mall, even perceiving the mall to be full of mannequins that will turn to face him. These are very similar to things like Scorpion's hallucinations that he inflicts on Spider-Man in Marvel's Spider-Man, or maybe you could even go and think about Scarecrow's gas and toxins in the Batman Arkham series, where a character is seeing something that isn't necessarily there. It's also a little bit Silent Hill-y in that same regard, where you don't always know what's going on, and you're kind of confused as to, okay, well, what is the reality of this situation? I think that plays very well into this human element of the game. I love it to death. It's probably one of the most unique things in the game, and I really am a sucker for when games do this. I really, really like when they handle these kinds of questions this way, and when they actually force you to confront a character's insecurities or nightmares and see what they fear, because it really does humanize the narrative so much and these characters, and really flesh them out and make them believable and not just two-dimensional. And I think it does a very good job of allowing you to influence the narrative as well. Characters you interact with, one thing I love about them is there is at least 3 main characters that you can heavily influence the ending of the game for. It's almost like Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 3, where they would have a slideshow and they would say, oh, and then the character did this because they were affected by the courier or the lone wanderer or whatever. Oh, this thing happened because of what your character did. There are role-playing game elements in Robocop Rogue City that are done extremely well, where you are deciding what you think about these different people and how you want to interact with them. Do you want to be standoffish with the person who's in charge of your psychiatric evaluations because you think they're a waste of time? Okay, that's going to play into how that person views robots, views you, views machinery, and it's going to play off into their ending because it directly affects a big moral choice that they are presented with. Do you want to push for Delta City because you think it would be safer, or do you think that the lack of freedom and the people that are going to be just absolutely bowled over to get there are worth fighting for? Those kinds of moral questions play out throughout the game, and I absolutely love it. I wish more games would be as attentive to their world building, character interactions, dialogue, and just overall story as Robocop Rogue City is. There's also the ideas of the ghost in the machine, the ideas of the ship of Theseus. Is it the human components of Robocop that make him him? Is there a soul in there? Is it just the memories of this dead guy manifesting in this robot? These are the kinds of questions you have to ask yourself, and I really do believe that they are surprisingly deep. These are not the kind of things that I think a lot of people thought of when they saw a Robocop game coming out. They just thought, huh, a shooter, neat. And I think a lot of people are missing out on the narrative and world building of this game and not really understanding how deep it actually is and how well done they actually managed to make this narrative, this world, the gameplay. It's not perfect. You know, you can tell that it was on a budget, and that's okay. I wish more games would be a little smaller like this and more heartfelt. And I know that Teon, the company who worked on this under Nacon, I know that they don't usually do sequels, but I actually hope that they do revisit this franchise in the future because I think they did a wonderful job with it. I think it's very clear that the keys were in the hands of caretakers who cared to get it right, who cared to get back original voice actors, who cared to actually get likenesses from the movies, who cared to make things accurate to the world that we believed this was when we were younger and maybe saw these films. I think that it's very clear that the people who were given the rights to make this game cared. And that's something that I truly wish we saw more of, because there's so many people now who make stuff just to make their thing. They get access to an intellectual property or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to use that as a vehicle for my thing. My thing takes priority. It's very obvious that when Teon made this game, they wanted the heart and soul of Robocop to take priority, and they really wanted people to think and feel playing the game and actually have reactions to the humanness of it. I wish we saw more stuff like this. I think it deserves to be celebrated, and honestly, if there's a game that's worth your money that came out this year that is at least flying under the radar, I think this is it. This is one of those games. So if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I'm interested to hear what you think. If you do want to see more content from me, there is a membership for this channel where you get access to different videos. Members now at the lower tiers have access to 15 or 16, I believe, members exclusive videos. Members at the higher tiers have access now to 25 or 26. So there is a lot of content there. There's also a lot of content over on our Patreon. And of course, as well, a ton of content for free over on Degenerate Plays, which is our Let's Play channel where we play through games and have a fun time. My wife Jill also runs her own channel, Magical Jill, where she just released a video game review about an MMO called Palia that I thought was a really awesome video, so I hope you'll check that out too. Links to all these things are in the description below. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.